Get off the property, Chloe. The voice didn't belong to my best friend. It didn't belong to the girl I'd shared a bunk bed with in college, or the woman who held my hair back when I was sick. It was cold. It was clinical. It sounded like a judge handing down a death sentence. Jade stood in the doorway of the apartment I had paid for, framed by the warm, expensive glow of the living room I had decorated with my own hands. She was swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux, the $400 a bottle kind, looking at me like I was a smudge on her windshield she'd finally wiped away. I was standing on the curb in a relentless Seattle downpour, clutching two leaking trash bags that held the pathetic real remains of my entire life. My sneakers were squelching, soaked through to the bone. One last tiny indignity before the world ended. "Jade, please," I choked out, the rain blurring my vision. "We built Vantage together. I missed my father's funeral to fix the kernel code so we wouldn't go bankrupt. I gave you everything." She didn't flinch. She just laughed, a dry, jagged sound that cut deeper than the wind. "It's not personal, Chloe. I've just outgrown you. I'm moving to a penthouse on the hill tomorrow, and you're moving back to your mother's basement. You were always the engine, babe, and I was the driver. But tell me, have you ever seen the engine get a trophy at the finish line?" She reached into her silk pocket, pulled out a crumpled $100 bill, and let it flutter into the oily puddle between us. "Take a cab, Chloe. You're depressing the neighbors." Then the deadbolt turned. The lights went out, and I was left standing in the dark, a ghost in a life that was no longer mine. We met at 19. I was the girl who could build a server from scrap parts. Jade was the girl who could talk her way out of a speeding ticket she actually deserved. We were a unit, or so I thought. When I came up with the idea for Vantage, an app that could sniff out ghost fees hidden in corporate bank statements, Jade was the only person I trusted. She didn't understand the math, but she understood the sell. For 2 years, I lived on caffeine and adrenaline. Every time I thought about stopping, Jade was there with a pep talk and a stack of papers. She told me not to worry about the legal stuff, that she had the lawyers on it. She'd slide documents across the table, whispering that I just needed to sign so she could secure our server space. I signed everything. I trusted her with my name, because I had already trusted her with my soul. I didn't realize that every signature was a brick in a wall she was building around me. She was using independent contractor agreements to prove I had no intellectual property rights. She was systematically erasing me from the history of my own creation. The betrayal wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, calculated freezing out. It started with small things. Jade forgetting to include me in emails with investors. Jade taking the lead in interviews, referring to me as her technical assistant rather than her co-founder. "It's just for the image, Chloe," she'll tell me later, her hand on my shoulder. Investors are old school. They want one face to talk to. "You know I couldn't do this without you." But behind my back, she was doing exactly that. She was working with Apex Corp's legal team to clean up the cap table. She was using the independent contractor agreements she'd tricked me into signing to prove that I had no intellectual property rights. The day she sold the company, I was at the grocery store. My card was declined for a $4 gallon of milk. When I called the bank, they told me the account had been closed. When I got home, the locks had already been changed. Jade hadn't just stolen the money. She had erased my existence from the company I had breathed life into. I didn't go to a lawyer. I knew Jade had covered her tracks too well for a standard courtroom to help me. Instead, I went to my mother's house, sat in my old bedroom, and waited. Jade was everywhere. She was on the cover of Fintech Weekly. She was doing day-in-the-life TikToks from her new penthouse, showing off her designer closet and her boss babe morning routine. She never mentioned me, not once. To the world, Chloe didn't exist. But Jade had a weakness. She was technically illiterate. She could sell a car, but she couldn't tell you how the engine worked. When I built the core architecture of Vantage, I built a digital heartbeat. Deep within the server's kernel, hidden behind layers of code, was a 128-bit encryption handshake. Every 30 days, the system performed a silent check. It looked for a specific encrypted signal that only originated from my local hardware. It was my safety net. If the server didn't receive that handshake, it assumed the company had been compromised. And the response? It didn't just crash. It began a progressive scramble. The decay started on day 31. It began with small things, users reporting that their dashboards looked fuzzy. Jade ignored it. But by day 32, the fuzzy text had turned into unreadable gibberish. Names became random strings of numbers. Bank balances turned into symbols. Jade called the junior devs I'd been replaced with, but they were useless. They couldn't find the source code for the encryption because it didn't exist in their files. It only existed in my head. By day 33, Apex Corp realized they had bought a lemon. The algorithms were encrypting their own backups. The diamond Jade had sold for $5 million was turning into digital charcoal, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. My phone, the cheap burner my mom had bought me, started vibrating at 2 a.m. I let it ring. I watched the screen light up with her name over and over again. I wanted her to feel the panic I felt on that rainy sidewalk. When I finally answered, I didn't say hello. I just listened to her breathe. She was hysterical. The clinical corporate voice was gone, replaced by a raw, jagged desperation. "Chloe, what did you do?" she screamed. "The Apex board is in my office. The platform is dead. Everything is gone. Fix it. Now." "I'm sorry, Jade," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "But I'm just the engine, remember? And the engine doesn't get a trophy, or a seat at the table, or a phone call when the system fails. I will sue you for everything. I'll put you in jail for sabotage." "Go ahead," I told her. "But according to the papers you forced me to sign, I haven't had access to that server in a month. If it's failing, it's a product defect. And since you're the genius who owns the company, I guess that's your problem to solve." I could hear her sobbing. The face of fintech was realizing that she had stolen a car she didn't know how to drive. She begged. She offered me $1 million. Money she didn't even have yet because the Apex payout was structured in tiers. I told her $1 million was the price of my silence a month ago. Now the price had gone up. I gave her one choice: a public notarized statement admitting I was the sole creator of Vantage, and a full return of my shares. If not, I told her to enjoy the lawsuit, because I knew Apex would sue her for everything she has once they realized she lied and defrauded them. "I'm going back to sleep, Chloe. Think about what I said." I disconnected my phone and the line went dead. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was finally going to get justice. I slept peacefully that night. The same couldn't be said for Jade. Apex Corp wasn't just angry. They were terrified. Vantage was integrated into the backends of 3 major regional banks. If the digital heartbeat didn't resume, those banks would lose access to their own auditing data, causing Apex to lose millions of dollars. Their legal team descended on Jade like vultures. They realized within hours that she couldn't explain a single line of the kernel code. She had sold them a black box and the key was in my pocket. They made it clear that if she didn't comply with my terms, they would file criminal charges for securities fraud and misrepresentation. They weren't just going to take the company back. They were going to take her freedom. She could be looking at 5 years in jail if she could hire a good lawyer, and more if she couldn't. Apex's final condition for the deal was a public apology video. They needed to distance themselves from Jade as much as possible to win back the trust of the banks and the investors who had poured millions into the acquisition. They needed the world to see that the genius was a fraud, and that the actual creator me was finally back at the helm with them. Jade had no choice. It was either this or prison. A week later, I watched the live stream. Jade was sitting in a sterile room, looking like a child caught stealing. The high-end designer suits were gone, replaced by a plain gray sweater that made her look small and insignificant. "I am Jade Richards," she began, her voice cracking, "and I am here to admit that I did not create Vantage. I am a thief. I defrauded my partner and best friend, Chloe Danvers. Every success belonged to her. I am a fraud, and I am sorry. The comments section was a bloodbath. In 10 minutes, she went from the golden girl of tech to the most hated woman in the industry. The day after the video went viral, the CEO of Apex Corp came to my mother's house himself. He didn't send a lawyer or an assistant. He sat on my mom's plastic-covered sofa and drank tea from a chipped mug. They offered me a 70% majority stake in a new subsidiary. Way more than Jade got. We realized that a face can be bought, but a brain is priceless, he said. Over the next year, my new company dominated the market. The banks didn't want a story, they wanted the security only I could provide. I moved out of the basement and into a quiet estate on the coast. No penthouses, no flashy parties, just the sound of the ocean and the hum of my servers. I haven't spoken to Jade since the night of the phone call. I blocked her number, her email, and her existence. But a few weeks ago, I pulled into a 24-hour drive-thru late at night. I was tired, coming back from a late-night release, just wanting a coffee. The window slid open, and a flat, exhausted voice said, "That'll be $12.45. I looked up. It was her. Jade was wearing a greasy polyester uniform with a crooked name tag. Her skin looked sallow under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her hands were stained with fry oil. The recognition hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her eyes darting from my face to the logo on my steering wheel, the symbol of the company I built without her. For a second, I saw the old Jade, the one who wanted to charm her way out of it, the one who would have made a joke and asked for a favor. But then, the light just went out of her eyes. She realized there were no more signatures to forge, no more souls to steal. She handed me my bag in total silence, her head bowed. The driver was now serving the engine. I thought about saying something. I thought about reaching into my wallet, pulling out $100 bill and telling her to take a cab home. But the truth is, her betrayal still hurts. The memory of that Seattle rain doesn't just wash away with a bank balance. If only she was a good person, we could both be benefiting from this success right now. We could have been celebrating in that penthouse together. But she felt the need to cheat, to get rid of me, and to have it all to herself. Now, look where that got her. I rolled up the window and drove away into the night. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. If you were me, what would you have done?